An entitled Karen refuses to take no from anybody at our company, because anytime we do, she goes above and beyond just to get us in trouble with whoever our manager might be. And after witnessing this in person, I'm honestly so glad that she eventually got fired. Here's what happened. So at around 2009, I had the pleasure of working with a woman who we will call Karen, who had one of the worst personalities in the country. She would basically say anything that flew out of her head at the moment, and if people didn't immediately agree, she'd scoff and walk away. For example, she went on holiday in Greenland and somehow got her hands on whale meat. Limited whale hunting is allowed in Greenland to keep the Inuit communities alive, and is definitely not something they're supposed to serve to a tourist. Anyways, this Karen liked it a lot, and of course said whale hunting should be allowed everywhere, so that Karens just like her can get it at the local supermarket. And when the rest of the people at the lunch table mentioned the environmental issues, she scoffed and stood up. Another example is when the canteen served something bizarre, and this Karen said that she expected me to eat it, because according to her, French people just eat everything. Well, were I French, I would have found that mildly offensive, but wouldn't you guess it, I'm actually Italian. I pointed that out to her, and she looked at me and said, "Wow, not French?" And she said this in a tone that clearly indicated that I offended her by not having a nationality that made her wrong. She then predictably scoffed and walked away. And yes, most interactions people have with this Karen were at the canteen, which was the place she was the hardest to avoid. The company we worked for was a medical one. I was a research engineer, and Karen was a biosafety manager or something like that in that region. The only work-related thing that I ever saw her doing was holding a yearly hand-washing course. Now, that isn't a bad idea in and of itself, as a surprisingly large share of people do not know how to wash their hands. I mean, I wasn't one of them, and at this point, I had already spent several years in laboratories that dealt with super toxic chemicals, so I went through the first course with flying colors and I thought that was it. Well, as you could probably imagine from a Karen like this, I was wrong. A year later, I got another invitation to the same course, and I obviously had to catch up with the 1 year of progress in the field of hand washing. Well, unfortunately, the same day, our distributor had asked for a long and complicated report that I was the only one able to write, so I ended up declining. This entitled Karen then came right up to my desk and said to me that attendance was mandatory. I then told her that I have an urgent task, but right as I said that, she turned and walked away without a single word. Now, I was surprised that she hadn't scoffed. I mean, that was really out of character, and I thought that maybe this was the end of it, but trust me, it definitely wasn't. You see, this Karen did exactly what other Karens would do, because when she left, she went to go talk to my manager. My manager told her I had an urgent task, whereupon she probably walked away without a word and definitely went to talk to his manager. This was the site manager, and as it turned out sometime later, he really did not want to come under any scrutiny. He realized immediately that had he ignored her as well, she would have gone to his manager, who's the senior vice president. That would have then turned into a whistleblower case where risky behavior from a callous, indifferent department could possibly contaminate production. It would have brought a lot of scrutiny on the site, which had no problem whatsoever with any kind of contamination, but had a plethora of dodgy hiring, consulting, and accounting issues, all of which stem from the site manager themselves. He definitely did not want that, so he went to me and told me to forget about the report, stating that hand washing was way more important. And that right there is how we delayed an important document, because instead of actually doing it like I was going to do, I instead spent the afternoon refreshing my hand washing technique. Thankfully, the site manager waited a few months for the next round of firing, just so he could quietly get rid of this entitled Karen. And in the resulting piece, it took upper management several years to catch up with his mistakes. And when they did, he was immensely rich, and the site had basically been stripped off. And thankfully, I was also long gone out of there before seeing any kind of backlash. Wow, there's a lot of things to unpack here. First of all, yeah, that entitled Karen is like super annoying, and she was basically on some kind of like power trip by being like, okay, it's time to wash our hands, everybody. And then if you don't do exactly as she says, she's then just gonna work her way up the ladder and get everybody else in trouble. And that, in my opinion, is so inappropriate and so uncalled for. But on the other hand, the fact that this went all the way to the site manager, who's already doing clearly some sketchy things with the company, that, in my opinion, is absolutely hilarious. This entitled Karen seriously almost took this guy down. It's one of those situations where, yeah, this Karen is bad, but apparently this site manager is way worse. Like, who knows how many accounting issues alone he was probably allowing to slip through the cracks just so he could get his paycheck check and then get out of there. So truly, good for you for getting out of that situation, because what started as a story about an entitled Karen quickly uncovered some very sketchy dealings by your site manager. And I know if I was in your shoes, I would be so glad to be out of there before people start to lose their jobs. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. An entitled family demands that we break the law and allow their child to come into our bar just so they can celebrate their 90-year-old grandfather's birthday. Here's what happened. So I work a job as a dishwasher for a casino restaurant. The place has a somewhat large dining room, small secluded party room, and a lobby with a bar off to the side that people walk through to get to the dining room. The host seats the customers, and I'm in charge of, among other tasks, keeping them stocked with silverware so they can fold it into rolls that they then place at tables with customers they seated. And well, it was during this routine that I found myself seeing the upcoming problem. As I walked through the dining room and around the corner to the lobby, I saw that we had many tables gathered together to make a large table for a group. As I rounded the corner, I see our host talking with a large group, and the first thing I saw was the Karen of the group talking with the hostess who was instructing them on how things worked around here. Beside this Karen was a young boy who looked to be no older than 5 or 6 years old, standing near her and looking everywhere, wearing a bright yellow bluey shirt. Now, what exactly is the problem, you might be asking? Well, our lobby area, due to it being right next to the bar, is considered by law to be part of the bar as well. It is illegal for us to seat children in this area, and I, knowing it is, and knowing that the host knows this, heads back to the bar after dropping off silverware for them to prep. At the bar, the currently scheduled head chef was busy with something, and I caught him as he was about to head back inside the kitchen. In my mind, I figured that the family would have to be seated in the dining room area for the sake of the child. So I told him about them because he could get a head start on getting some servers to move tables around inside. But once I checked back outside, I learned exactly what really happened. It turns out the family was there to celebrate their 90-year-old grandfather's birthday, and they thought that we would make an exception and ignore the law just for them. You know, as they try to take their child into the bar area. He later informed me that they were not going to take no for an answer, and that I had saved them from trying to cause problems with the host, who was telling them the same thing, that they could not bring their child in. It was against the law. They thankfully decided to leave as they were not getting their way to sit in the bar area, and honestly, I think this really was the best case scenario to avoid our restaurant from breaking the law. The fact that this entitled family seriously tried to fight the host on this law, in my opinion, is like so insane it's not even funny. Like, do they not understand that they are literally going into a section that legally this kid is not allowed to be in? Can you imagine the liability and the lawsuit that could easily go against them if that kid was in that area? It seriously boggles my mind that some people think that the law just doesn't apply to them. But thankfully, these people left without any kind of like massive outburst or anything like that, because they were very clearly in the wrong by trying to bring a child into a bar. My mom is constantly coming to me for emotional validation, and after dealing with her depressive episodes since I was a teenager, I'm honestly at my breaking point and I now don't know what to do. Here's what happened. So I was planning a vacation to the United States to see my family. I had done this trip by myself once before in June, and my mother had expressed disappointment that she couldn't go, and the 2 weeks that I went were absolute bliss. For context, my mother has clinical depression. That's fine, and that's one thing, and I've always known a lot of her behaviors are not her own fault. They are simply symptoms of her illness, but she relies on me for literally everything. If something has gone wrong, which it always has in her eyes, I'm the one that has to fix it. She runs to me like a child to have me emotionally validate her. If I try to point out that she's being unreasonable, she snaps at me. She threatens me, makes me do things for her, holds things over my head, while perpetually guilt-tripping me if I dare do anything she doesn't like. She's incredibly lonely, I know that, but I've been her emotional crutch and her support system since I was a young teenager, and now that I'm 23 years old, I can't do this anymore. She really wanted to go on this trip, and essentially brought up every day if we were gonna book her a ticket, so I decided, fine, let's do that, and hopefully family would occupy her enough to give me the space and time I need away from her. For context, I live with her due to a tight financial situation, as I am saving up for medical school. I paid for her $800 ticket, and it's money that I will never see back ever again. I work in a nursing home on the night shift, and I'm burning the candle from both ends. I'm so tired. She has complained since the moment we got here. She seems to expect large, grand gestures from family, showing how much they miss her, and when she doesn't get that, she's angry. Last night she swore at me and told me to get lost. She makes digs in front of our entire family, skewing me to be lazy, as if the last few years haven't been an absolute nightmare. I've already said to a cousin that I might just leave early since she doesn't have any money with her to spend, and the stress of keeping up with her emotional needs and her financial needs are just way too much. I came for a break, not more caregiving. My family doesn't know, as she is an expert manipulator. I just can't wait to move out because honestly, I am so done. Yeah, I don't blame you for wanting to get out of there. Your mom is just dominating your time emotionally, and I know if I was in your shoes, I would feel completely trapped, as if I have no room to breathe or do anything around the house. That is incredibly unfair to you, and hopefully you're able to find a place to live sooner than later, because the way your mom is treating you is awful, and honestly, you definitely do not deserve that. My awful job exposes the fact that I'm autistic to customers just so management can avoid any complaints that might come their way. Here's what happened. So I'm a male, and when I was in my 20s, I worked as a cashier at a fast casual restaurant in the New Orleans suburbs known for vaguely Mediterranean cuisine. There were multiple locations in the area, but the one I worked at was probably the Tony's neighborhood in Jefferson Parish, and that would be Old Metairie. You see, Old Metairie was, well, very old. It had been a streetcar suburb of New Orleans 100 years ago, and was where a lot of old money ended up moving in the mid-20th century if they wanted to actually still have a chance of locals considering them in. The social scene in this city is fascinating in the most old-school way. Now, this is only vaguely relevant to the story, but this is the neighborhood that I grew up in as well. I'm in my 30s now, but at the time of the story, I'm in my late 20s, and I'm still in university. I struggled a lot as a teen and young adult because I had been diagnosed with autism fairly late in high school, and my parents weren't the best at understanding what that meant. Now, as a note, they are not bad people, and I don't want anyone to get that idea. At the time, I was working 2 jobs, a full-time floor coordinator at a high-end salon, and a part-time position with this restaurant. Together, this was just enough to pay my bills and keep a roof over my head and food on my plate. Now, generally speaking, I believe that being open and honest about my autism is a net good. I'm very high-functioning, but I still struggle in a few places, some of which I may be able to overcome, and some of which I may have to accept and live with as part of me. As such, everyone I've worked for since my mid-20s has been made aware of it, though I don't claim it as a disability. It's just some helpful information, like telling people you're hard of hearing in one ear so they don't think you're ignoring them. Now, with that bit of context out of the way, let's get into the main story. There were multiple locations in the area, and when we took phone orders, we would occasionally get calls from people who would call the wrong location. This was mostly easy to sort out, except for one particular other location. Remember how I said the neighborhood was called Old Metairie? Well, we also have a location in Metairie. As such, you can imagine that a lot of people would only vaguely register what we said when we answered the phone, and our costs on waste for this has been higher than average. But this was way above my pay grade to worry about. But what was my pay grade was dealing with the irate customers, so I came up with a fairly clever, if not silly, way to combat this. When I would answer the phone, my personal script was to say the following: "Hi, you're calling Old Metairie on Old Metairie Road. How can I help you?" Now, the street we were on was actually just called Metairie Road, but I'd add the extra old to give the customers a double hint, and honestly, most of the time it worked really well. That is, until an entitled Karen called in one night. So we're fairly busy this evening, but we're not entirely slammed. I'm handling the takeout register tonight, which means I'm on the phone as well. Now, I'm actually a really good customer service worker, but I'm the sort that needs their manager's faith and support. My service mantra is that the customer may not always be right, but the customer must always feel respected. But I also know that respect is a two-way street, so in other words, I am no doormat. So the phone rings and I answer it, delivering my usual script greeting, only to then have about 3 full beats of absolute silence before someone on the other end says, "I'm sorry, where?" Now, I can hear the woman's distaste in her voice, and my warning flags immediately go up, but I politely repeat myself more slowly because I do speak quickly sometimes and with a bit of an accent, so I understand. She replies by saying, "Why are you calling that? That's not the name of the street. You sound dumb saying it like that." And me, in my perennially hopeful head, thinking that I can just explain it to her. I've actually explained it before before to regulars, and they'd always complimented me on it being fairly simple, but a clever way to avoid confusion. So I tell her, "I'm sorry ma'am, we get a lot of call-in orders for the other Metairie location, and I came up with this way of answering as a way to make sure customers know if they've got the wrong number." Now again, I may be autistic, but I'm in New Orleans. Customer service is in our blood. She apparently wasn't impressed by my ingenuity, however, and continued to insult me and my script. I politely interjected and asked if she would like to place a to-go order, and she then begrudgingly put her order in, actually returning to her insults afterwards before I thanked her politely and ended the call. Of course, this being a to-go order, it meant there was a pretty high likelihood that she'd be the one picking it up. Normally, this isn't a very complicated thing. We'd stage the orders with their tickets taped to the bags so that the order names were clearly visible and basically operated on an honor system if the orders were prepaid. Otherwise, it was a fairly quick matter to pull up the order and run the customer's card. Well, the Karen in this case decided it was not going to be quick, as she felt her opinion on my phone script was of vital importance to management. So she marches in and is actually much younger than I expected, probably in her 30s at the time. Since I work at a high-end salon for my main job, I immediately make her for someone who spends at least 3 figures per month on her hair alone. But I also tag her as new money, which means she's flashing a ton of expensive jewelry and designer everything with logo prints and then some. I greet her and immediately she asked who she'd spoken to on the phone. I reply that it was probably me, given that I don't know which order she's here to pick up yet. She proceeds to look at me for a couple of beats and then snidely remarks that I shouldn't answer the phone like that because it makes me sound stupid. I look at her and I thank her for her input, and even though I know who she is, I ask her what the name is under her order. Apparently though, my attitude demanded further commentary, as she demanded then to speak to my supervisor. Now, for reasons you'll shortly learn, I like my supervisor much more than my managers. I'd actually protected her from an awful customer several months prior, and this is before she had been promoted, and we had a really good and open working relationship. She received the customer's commentary, and knowing why I answered the phone as I did, went ahead and reiterated this reasoning. The customer was unable to comprehend this and continued to insist that it sounded stupid and dumb, and it made the restaurant look bad. By that point, I had handed the transaction off to my supervisor and turned my back to the counter to focus on some side work while she sorted all of this out, as it was nearing the end of my shift. Eventually, she left, but that wasn't nearly the end of it. She then called back twice that evening, once while I was still there, and once after my shift had ended, demanding to speak to a manager as she felt my supervisor had not adequately handled the matter. Now, I don't remember precisely the order of the next few events, but in essence, what happened was the following, and told to me by my supervisor a month or so later. First of all, the customer did eventually get in touch with my manager. Apparently, she pulled the same BS with her, basically insisting that I sounded dumb and stupid answering the phones the way that I did, and essentially, she would not take no for an answer. My manager was an okay manager until it came to any kind of crunch, and then she tended to fold or push blame onto other people so that she wouldn't be the target anymore. Well, in this case, she decided that the best way to get this lady to leave her alone was to apologize on my behalf and tell her that I had autism. Yes, you read that correctly. My manager disclosed my private medical information to a customer so that the customer would leave her alone. Now, I realize that some folks might think this is some kind of gray area because of how open I am about my diagnosis, but as a rule, I do not use my neurodivergence as an excuse, and it is my choice who is told. I'm very proud that I'm able to speak about my autism in a positive way to people, and having it be used as an excuse for perfectly rational behavior without my consent was an outrage to me. But here's the thing, it actually gets worse. Remember that I mentioned my supervisor was the one who clued me in on this? Well, she only found out about it because her position required her to attend managers' meetings. In a particular meeting, this customer apparently came up because even after all that, she also emailed a formal complaint about me to corporate. Now, did they sarcastically dismiss the ravings of a mad Karen and move on to more important things? No, of course not. Apparently, corporate management, the regional manager, and my manager all spent the next 5 or so minutes mocking me, questioning my diagnosis, discussing whether I had anything else wrong with me, and just in general being absolutely vile, disgusting sacks of humanity. Now, if you're hoping they got what was coming to them, I'm afraid afraid I must disappoint. As far as I know, at the time, there was no proof that this conversation had occurred, despite Louisiana being a single consent state, and I was also in a very bad place mentally. I didn't know it, but I was at the beginning of a slide in my relationship with my family that eventually resulted in me having a total mental breakdown and my going no contact and moving to another state. One of the things that eventually led to this was the fact that my parents generally disregarded and invalidated my concerns and feelings when I told them about very real offenses, such as a university professor conspiring with another student to stalk me. I just didn't have the fight left in me at that point to try and go after the company, despite there being numerous other violations that I had witnessed and others being far more easily proven. For example, they would be illegally dumping to waterways, there were numerous OSHA violations, there were health code violations, state labor law violations, not to mention the wage theft. I mean, there was so much I could have gone after them for. So yes, they got away with it, and I eventually quit a year or so before COVID. But I'm in a much better place now with a good government job and a relatively stable life, and I'm just so glad that I don't have to deal with those people ever again. Wow, that's a crazy situation. The fact that your job would not only entertain this stupid Karen's dumb accusations, that in and of itself is already really stupid, but also that your manager somehow felt it was okay to basically expose that you're autistic to a customer, that blows my mind completely, and that's so uncalled for. Like, that is such a huge violation of trust and privacy, it's not even funny. So with all things considered, honestly, I'm so glad you're out of that job. Those people sounded awful, and there's no way in the world anyone should ever get treated that way. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.